Hi everyone, and welcome to After Dark Analysis. On today's Why Is This a Thing, we are going to discuss weaponized sounds in horror films. There are going to be spoilers in here for Sounds Like from Masters of Horror and Pontypool. Now, we've talked about horror utilizing sound in the past on this channel, specifically in the jump scare episode and in the series about horror for people that don't like horror, because a lot of those were older films that use the you don't see it, you just hear it because of censorship at the time. What I want to do is specifically focus on movies that mainly use sound for the element of horror, not necessarily a death that you don't see, but language or sound that you're hearing is actually the driving force behind everything horrific happening in the movie. So we're starting with 2006, Sounds Like from the Masters of Horror series. Deeply affected by a personal tragedy, an office drone comes to realize his sense of hearing has taken on extraordinary capabilities that could drive him insane. Basically, our main character, Larry, is a supervisor at a call center. He kind of sits off in a booth above everybody. And he listens into calls, and he has buttons that can terminate the call if he feels like it's going poorly. He terminates a call towards the beginning of the film when the employee starts saying he doesn't understand why he was terminated. He says he could hear it in his voice that he was about ready to snap at that woman, which, to be fair, she did seem rather tech illiterate. But you would think if you're working in a tech call center, you'd kind of be used to that by now. The first hint that we kind of get that something's up with Larry is when he goes home. He's in his garage, the door is shut, and he can hear his wife knitting. The other things he's overhearing are like the smoke alarm. Well, that's designed to be obnoxious. That's, hey, replace the battery so you don't die in a fire. He also hears his wife through earplugs, and if you've ever tried to wear earplugs to sleep, especially the cheaper kind, you can still hear through them. Next day at work, an employee thinks Larry overheard him texting on the phone because this was 2006, so smartphones weren't super prevalent. We still had flip, where when you pressed the button, you got kind of a bit of a sound. So they're wondering how in the world he could even hear that, because he was way far away from this guy, but he swears up and down that Larry overheard him. And then they start talking about him coming back to work after what happened. You eventually figure out that his son passed away. They mention that he came back to work the next day. Now, people grieve in a whole lot of different ways, and some people do throw themselves into work. Larry doing that's not totally abnormal, but it's not also necessarily the most healthy thing. Throughout the film, Larry's hearing gets more and more and more sensitive. Not only could he hear his employees talking to him about several tables away through a crowded lunchroom, he goes to see his son's grave, and there's a flag waving on another grave that just disrupts him completely. He can't focus and hear over it. Him and his wife go out to dinner, and it's not like they went to Chuck E. Cheese. There were children there, but it was a much quieter restaurant, but he can't hear her over everybody else around. So the fact that Larry just can't get away from noise and be alone with his thoughts is really starting to weigh down on him. He ends up flipping out on an employee because he was talking with a woman. She was upset about her relationship. So the guy stayed on the phone a minute or two more just to kind of console her and help her out, which Larry, of course, flips about. You can argue that's bureaucratic drone, or you can argue he's just starting to get more and more irritable. His wife, at one point, he catches in his son's room, and she says, like, you're acting like he's still alive. We have to be practical here. You know, I think I am pregnant, which is kind of weird because she thinks she's pregnant like 2 days after they had sex, which you really can't tell then. So it's clear the super hearing coupled with the fact he probably never really dealt with the loss of his son is starting to cause him to break. Like, one of the first signs that something is, he's gone, aside from him flipping out with his wife, is he's in the garage. It's normally his quiet place. It's a place he can work on things. He actually builds, like, little toy sailboats because that was what his son enjoyed, so he drops them off at the grave. But at one point, he hears something in the wall, and it's just deafening to him. He cuts through the drywall and realizes there's baby mice. And while it's a cut, he pulls out a hammer and it's pretty obvious what happened. During this, he was also trying to bond with the employee he had originally reamed out for trying to help somebody, and tried to forge a relationship with him. The day after that, though, he comes in and finds out the employee quit, claiming that Larry was harassing him. And it was one of those, the things he said to him were innocent, but they could have easily been misinterpreted as innuendo for Larry attempting to get with this man in a fashion that probably neither of them were interested in. So he absolutely flips shit, goes home, and just breaks up his entire house. He just starts smashing things. At one point, he looks down at the fish tank because the pump has been annoying to him. And he looks at the fish's face and just can't do it. But then he goes and cuts the power so nothing can make noise, because the electricity's just not there. Which, I hate to say, it would have killed the fish as well, because you need to keep water circulating. He thinks he's finally got everything. You know, he got the power off so none of the electronics can work. He smashed the smoke alarm, which is going off batteries. But there's still a noise when he goes upstairs and realizes his wife is asleep. She's specifically in REM sleep, which stands for rapid eye movement. He can actually hear her eyes moving under her eyelids. It's kind of obvious where that one goes. And he gets a night of sleep. He goes to work. He's happy. He's moving forward. He even starts to not be able to hear everything. There's a point where he's at lunch and he can't hear the fly that's buzzing around. He can't even hear the cashier. So he thinks problem solved. Until he goes home and can hear water running. And then it just keeps happening and keeps coming back, and work is just shit again. Which he probably exacerbated by showing up to work with massive sound deafening headphones that he put a kind of knit cap over, I guess thinking it was going to try and hide it, but it's going to hide big orange headphones. And when he gets up into his office, he thinks the callers are talking about him. Like, he starts to get really, really paranoid and terminates everybody's call. He kind of runs into his boss, who's obviously yelling at him of, why did you terminate all of calls? We're going to have a lot of very angry customers. But all he can hear at this point is, I would say it's a cross between paper crinkling and water running. It's just this weird modified sound, and that's all he can hear anymore. And Larry's final solution to all of this is to hack off his own ears. By this point, the cops have come and realize something's very, very wrong here. We also see a storyline very similar to this in the show Darknet. Their second episode had a guy in an apartment trying to find where the sound was coming from. So not only was he going crazy trying to find the source of the sound, he was going crazy because it was just so loud. He couldn't think of anything else. He couldn't sleep. He couldn't really do anything but hear this sound. So both of these focus more on the organic breakdown of what can happen. There are people that have extraordinary hearing. There are people that can constantly hear something, and without spoiling the end of that episode, there was a very logical, sane reason for that guy to be hearing the stuff in his apartment. Not being able to be alone with our thoughts and not being able to just be free from a bunch of babbling nonsense can get very, very stressful very, very quickly. People do need some solitude, no matter how extroverted they are. So the constant go, go, go can break people a lot faster than they realize. We're even seeing more and more of this with how much technology is coming into our lives, because we really can't ever break away and have time off, so to speak. So people aren't distressing, and that's just building and building and building, and people are just burning out or just going nuts a lot sooner. Moving on to something a little less organic is the film Pontypool from 2008. A psychological thriller in which a deadly virus infects a small Ontario town. This movie opens on a radio station. It's hosted by Grant Mazzy, who seems to be kind of new to the station, but he already hates it. It's a podunk town, and it's beneath him. The producer is begging him to not upset all of his listeners this early in, and they have a former soldier as an assistant named Laurel Ann. Grant wants to focus on a busted grow operation and kind of stir some drama, saying that growers put booby traps everywhere, and these kids and dogs are going to run into the wrong yard and die, and then everybody's going to be sorry. Whereas Sydney, the producer, is pushing him to say which schools are closed or not, because they are in the middle of a massive snowstorm. For a good long while in this film, nothing seems really wrong. Sydney mentions that her sister and Roger are both late calling in, which apparently is a systematic thing. They're on time every day. So that worries her a bit, but is somewhat quickly forgotten when Laurel Ann pulls over the police scanner that there's a possible hostage situation. Nothing about it's coming over the wire, though. Unfortunately, Laurel Ann already sent it in to Grant when Sydney wanted to sit on it, just until they had more facts and confirmation. They're convinced it's a prank. Until Dr. John Menendez's office starts to get a swarm of people outside of it. Menendez was under investigation for writing unnecessary prescriptions, so thinking people were commuting to this man's office to riot and just trying to go in, people were getting trampled. And they knew all of this, and they could confirm all of this because Ken, who's their weatherman, was out and seeing all of it. He saw military trucks come in, he saw choppers, and next thing they know, the road is blocked. So to buy some time, they have some kids come in to sing. When the kids are done singing, one of the little girls keeps saying the phrases, "I can't remember how it ends," and it keeps starting over and over. And she just keeps repeating these things until eventually she just settles on repeatedly making the word "praw," which is at that point more of a noise. And we can rule out stage panic because she was done. Like, she was done being broadcast over the air. So stage fright would have been kind of weird or very late set. Grant's getting really concerned, though. He's just like, something's not right with this kid. And still nothing's coming over the wire about what in the world's going on out there. The kid singing bought them enough time to get an eyewitness on the scene. Apparently there is a mob chanting outside of a senile old woman's room. I'm guessing she's in some kind of retirement home. That's why they said room and not home. And they were trying to get in. There's another group near the woods chanting. And there's a family trapped in a car. And the weird bit is the people surrounding them are imitating windshield wipers. All anybody can seem to agree on is that people are crowding and people are saying very repetitive things. This gets big enough that the BBC actually contacts them. During the course of the interview, they confirm that there are French-Canadian roadblocks, and BBC is trying to tie it to a terrorist, separatist, or insurgency. But Grant keeps saying it doesn't sound organized. He doesn't buy that because he's like, we're in a small Ontario town. Why in the world would terrorists be here? And what would they gain by swarming places and chanting things? It's weird, but it's not inherently threatening yet. They're able to get Ken, the weatherman, back on the phone, and he says the mob is pulling those two people out of the van now. And then he says they're biting them. They can hear him, and you think he's attacked because the call drops after some seriously weird noises. Eventually a message does come in, and it informs people to stay safe. They have to avoid contact with close family members, avoid terms of affection, avoid small children, avoid the English language as a whole, and then says, please do not translate this message, because it came in French, because, again, remember, we're in Canada. In this area, it does not seem abnormal for people to be bilingual in both English and French. Ken is able to call back in, which is great, because it confirms he's still alive, but she's next to Marigold's teenage boy, who he describes as battered and dying. Ken is able to record him making a sound that people can only describe as a child screaming inside of his breath. This is a full-blown teenage boy, and it sounds like he's rather athletically built, but he's making this noise like an infant, and no one can figure out how in the world he could even make that noise. Grant's convinced this isn't a very elaborate prank, so he starts moving out to get out of the building, because he's just furious. Laurel Ann and Sydney are both chasing after him. He gets outside and sees there's this massive blizzard. He doesn't see anything abnormal aside from there's a lot of snow. And Sydney just starts screaming, "Don't walk out on me, Grant. I need you." They're able to convince Grant to come back inside because of that, but then the mob starts just swarming the door, screaming, "Don't walk out on me, Grant, and I need you." During all of this, they are trying to stay on the air just as some kind of emergency service or just to keep people informed, which does require at one point Grant to just read a laundry list of the dead. And it sounds like it's just family member after family member after family member killing each other, which would make sense because the note earlier said avoid loved ones. Then Laurel Ann starts repeating that she's missing Mr. Massey. The doctor from earlier breaks in. They're able to barricade themselves in the sound booth and keep Laurel Ann out because he keeps referring to her as infected. What he has figured out is that there is a mutation in the language that is infecting people. So they're going to say repetitive things over and over again, and Laurel Ann is saying she's missing Mr. Massey as a form of hunting them. So it's almost like sonar. Her repeating the same phrase over and over again would make some sense because the way sonar works is it goes out and bounces back. So if you keep the same speech, it should theoretically bounce back the same way. They lock themselves in the sound booth because it's completely soundproof, so she can't hear them because they're drawn to sound. Ken does call back in, and he tells them that there is a group chanting, "Look out for U-boats," which doesn't make any sense because he's on the road. He's ditched off of that. Why would you be concerned about boats on the road? He says this seems like a symbol of the disorder, and they say, "Don't you mean symptom?" And then he just keeps repeating that he needs a simple kind of sample and just keeps going with it over and over and over again. The doctor's able to confirm, yes, he is infected, hang up, it's done, he's going to die. Because during all of this, Laurel Ann is just slamming herself into the window. And the doctor uses her as kind of a test subject. Since she's not able to feed, eventually she just vomits up blood and dies. Of course, this causes Sydney to just break. So then they try and sit there and figure out what's going on. The doctor theorizes that certain words are infected. So when they're said, they spread. Not too long after Laurel Ann's death, the mob finds their way in. So they have to find a way to distract them. Again, they're attracted to sound, so they decide to pump out of the building to lure them away the phrase, "Sydney Breyer is alive," just over and over and over again. Not too long after this, the doctor starts to ramble in his native tongue and proclaims it's only the English language that's infected. But he keeps repeating the same thing over and over again. It's just incomprehensible to anybody that doesn't speak that language. So Grant and Sydney decide to start speaking in French because they're like, well, if English is only infected and whatever language he's speaking is only infected, let's try French so we can communicate. They stumble across the girl from earlier who was infected and she attempts to attack them. Unfortunately, they do have to kill her. And they're just having this back and forth trying to figure out what in the world's going on. And Grant points out it's normal in childhood. Most kids do this. You would just repeat words over and over again until they just became incoherent. Considering the first person we really see firsthand with this is a child, makes a whole lot of sense. Because not too long after this realization, Sydney starts repeating the word kill over and over again. He's under the belief that she has an infected word. So he tries to make the word kill not mean kill anymore. He's able to equate the word kill with kiss, and apparently the word kiss is not affected. He's able to essentially cure her. So they start broadcasting that people have to stop making sense, or else they're going to be also infected by this virus. The military is screaming at them in French to stop. They're trying to make this go away. Essentially, it seems like they just want to get rid of the town, because it seems like at that point, this is the only opportunity for containment. And it's a little vague as to how broad sweeping the military ends up being and how far this ends up going. But this was using the English language as a virus and as a new way of affecting things. Whereas the two instances before were just inescapable sound. This again was creating inescapable sound, but it was creating it through something organic that changed and mutated and found a new way to infect the human race. Well, every single instance of this hasn't really used loud noises like we would expect with a jump scare. What we do get is distorted music, which can remind us of the calls animals or other humans make during death. This is kind of a way of cross-species communication. You can tell when another person or an animal is in duress. It's more of a warning of don't come near me because whatever's killing me could kill you as well. And I think we see this in pretty much all of these of people can't escape this noise, so this death that's following me could easily be following you as well. Which sounds like it eventually distorted into that weird paper water sound is the only way I can think to describe it. In Pontypool, it degrades into just incomprehensible gibberish. The mobs do the very childish thing of repeating it until it no longer makes any sense. But especially once Grant and Sydney realize, hey, if we change up what we're saying, we're not going to get infected, that's when it just becomes just nonsense. Because both of them are fairly low gore. So they are playing on that very old horror stereotype of what you don't see and what your imagination will fill it in with is normally more terrifying. But they also use this as, what if we took that even a step further and we made it completely disjointed, completely illogical, and completely irrational, but kept the basis still kind of real world. Neither of these films really had to create a universe that was different from our normal lives. These were people going to work, bad things happening. These things unfortunately do happen. Probably just not to this extent though. But people do get sick, people do pass it along, people can have extraordinary senses. So not only are we reverting back to that old trope, we're reverting back to this childish sense of just constantly needing to make noise and constantly needing to repeat, to understand, look at that in an adult way, and realize how terrifying it could be. How often do we see in especially ghost or possession films, the kid creepily singing the nursery rhyme too slow or on repeat? Many films have used the same song throughout to indicate that the demon or big bad boss is coming. Well, typically those don't turn into a jump because that would get really old really fast. It's using the exact same logic these films are using of each time you start to hear something like this, you know something's coming. And not to mention that the real world instances we've heard about where people did use music to torture people. It's not uncommon to blast enemies with music just to disorient them. Because that inability to escape sound, not to mention that these films tend to have a very claustrophobic feel. When Larry's in his office and sounds like pretty much all of Pontypool takes place at the radio station, sans maybe the first couple of minutes. So you do get this very boxed in feeling. So not only are they making this inescapable noise, they're also making you feel you can't get out with just the locations and the way they're shooting. So what do you think? Is the idea of weaponized sound kind of ridiculous? Do you think it has some basis and some substance in the real world? Let me know in the comments below. If you like what you're hearing, please hit like, subscribe, something like that. If you don't like what you're hearing, please drop a comment. Let me know. Thank you.